everyone, to a very belated episode, potentially one of the last ones we'll do in 2022 for the BigFooty Bombercast. It's been a while since we talked to you, halfway through trade week, and a lot has happened for us to unpack. And to help me do so, I've got my regular co-host, Bonta34. How are you going, Bonts?
I'm good, Grizz. I actually believe last time we spoke, we bemoaned the fact that we weren't really getting involved in trade week, and then about 30 seconds after we stopped recording, the Sam Wiedemann deal suddenly grew legs.
Yeah, I realized at that point we really should just be time stamping our podcast so people don't think we're just completely oblivious. You've given me quite a good segue there, and we will jump straight into it. We'll probably break this podcast into two parts. There'll be the footy stuff that's happened, the list recruitment, draft, and trade period, and then we'll probably look a bit more to next year, some off-field appointments, and the fixture which dropped basically midday today being the 10th of December 2022. But we will touch on the trade period and the list management decisions made. We had a pretty active last 3 days of trade period with Will Setterfield and Sam Wiedemann coming out the door. We got knocked back on the Jack Bowes deal, couldn't get pick 7 in the door, but we did get that big body midfielder through Will Setterfield and Sam Wiedemann in the door as a reserve key forward. How do you feel about those sort of acquisitions? They're pretty cheap.
Well, I mean, Setterfield, look, I think we might have touched on him last time, and I'm not sure. I think back then I might have said that I feel like he's a pick that Adrian Dodoro has just wanted to have for a very long time, and has finally got his man a little bit. He'll fill a need. He's a big body mid. He won't be, the Patrick Cripps, Clayton Oliver 30 plus touches bursting through the middle, but not all big midfielders have to be that mold. We just need a big body in there to be able to provide some shelter, basically, for Parrish and Merritt and whichever other small bloke we throw into the middle. Hobbs is another one that obviously go through there now. Perkins is, the other one that goes through there. So we sort of just need a body in there, and I suppose Setterfield, he gives us a body in there.
I don't know how to feel about Will Setterfield. Like it was obviously really highly regarded in his draft year. I think he went pick 5. We were contemplating pick 1. I think this was like our third crack at him. I think we tried to get him when he was coming out of GWS.
We did. Yes.
So I think this might be our third crack. It's a classic sort of distressed asset pickup, isn't it? What the role he was playing was this outside wing halfback at Carlton, which clearly wasn't his gig. They had quite a full engine room over there at the Blues. I sort of throw my hands up and go, what's the worst that can happen? We clearly needed sides in the midfield. And like you said, he probably doesn't need to come in and be the breadwinner in terms of possessions, but carving out space. He's done some tagging jobs for Carlton in the past as well. So we know we can, commit defensively, which is something our midfield needs as well. For the cost that we needed a big body. I think we were after Jack Bytel and Jack Bowes. We got one big body in. We'll see how he goes. And if it doesn't work out, it's a low cost acquisition with probably not a lot of salary, so I'm not worried. The one that sort of jumped out of nowhere was Sam Wiedemann. It just sort of went from nothing to he was touring the facilities to he's a bomber in like 48 hours. And I think it was a bizarre sort of scenario because we had just sort of delisted Cody Brand. Josh Eyre obviously followed out the door quickly after. We re-signed James Stewart and Aaron Francis obviously to Sydney. The Sam Wiedemann one was sort of out of nowhere. What role do you see? Do you see him as the best 22 player next year, or do you think this is just, again, like a Peter Wright style, pick up on the cheap and see what the hell you get?
I don't think he's his best 22, but I think I can see why they would have gone out and got him. Because if you do look at our forward line, you mentioned obviously Peter Wright, who's our star forward now. You've then got Harrison Jones, who's had his fair share of injuries. And then you've also got Kane Baldwin. But after that, James Stewart can go forward, but James Stewart's also 29 years old and will be pushing towards 30 by the end of next year. He won't be 30 until 2024, but obviously he's 30 in early 2024. So, he's not going to be, unless you think we're going to win the flag in the next 2 years, he's not going to be there. So you can sort of understand why they want some depth, because if Jones goes down, Baldwin goes down or doesn't come on like we expect, we still need a plug-and-play player, and I think that's just going to be Wiedemann, to be honest.
Yeah, I wonder if there was a bit of list rebalancing. We had like, there was one point where we had like 5 key defenders running around the VFL, and that's probably partly due to Truck not wanting to play any key defenders in the seniors. And so we dropped Aaron Brand. I think McBride went through the draft to be picked up as a Cat B rookie, and we just need some more forward depth, particularly Darren Francis, who was playing forward late in the year, leaving for Sydney. I heard some interesting comments by Scott about wanting to leave right forward more. So maybe that means if Wiedemann does play, it's as that second key forward reserve ruck, because they haven't increased the interchange to 5. They've left it at 4 with a tactical sub, which is talk about bewildering decisions. But I wonder if that's his really niche role, is that second key forward with a ruck sort of counterpart. I have my real doubts about Harry Jones at the moment. I don't think he's shown, in his 3 years of football, that he can be on the park for more than 12 or 13 games a year. And at some point, he's going to have to do that. And if he doesn't, I suppose Wiedemann's the insurance. We will touch briefly on one of your favourites, Vale, the career of Aaron Francis at Essendon. He did depart basically to Sydney for the cost of what it took to get Wiedemann in. It looked like it was a 1-for-1 swap. Just want to acknowledge Aaron Francis, who had a really tough run at Essendon, a lot of personal stuff off the field, which probably derailed him early in his career. It just never sort of worked out, and hopefully all the best for him in Sydney.
Yeah, and obviously the problem, which I've said repeatedly with Francis, is that we just never played him in one spot. And you take a bloke who clearly just needs confidence, and you throw him from end to end, and it doesn't work out. And then you throw your hands up in the air and go, "What's going on?" And I mean, I think he'll be good for Sydney. I think they'll get the best out of him, because they'll put him down alongside Paddy and Tom McCartan, and I think they'll turn him into the new Ted Richards, and we'll go from there. Because I mean, really, if you look, 2019 was Francis's best year by far, and it just so happened to be the year that we put him down the back and just let him play that half back line. And I think he had 14 or 15 touches a game, which isn't bad for a bloke of his size. So. Yeah, I think it'll come back and bite us in the ass, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think there was a redundancy in his spot. There were too many guys like him forward, and we clearly prioritised other people in defence over him. Guys like Reid and Cox and Jaden Laverty, I think, probably took his spot in defence. I think Jordan Ridley's rise as quickly as he did probably crest him over with his position. He'll slot straight into that sort of Dane Rampy role in Sydney. I have no doubt that he's exactly what they love in their key defenders. He's an intercept guy. He's got explosive power. He's a good kick out of the defence. So I think he's going to look really good in a Sydney jumper, and we'll all be banging our heads against the wall. But he's just one of a few departures. We probably don't need to go over them too much. Tom Cutler, who was not bad depth for, I think he was a 4th round pick trade. Braden Ham, McDonough, old man McDonough, 1 year on the list, so clearly not in our long-term plans. Aaron Brand, as we discussed, and Dev Smith retiring. So any of those that stick out to your Bonds?
Probably the only one that sticks out to me is, and I won't even talk about old man McDonough, because that's it was a terrible pick at the time, and it's been a terrible pick now. But anyway, his Cutler's to me is sort of. I reckon if it had been 5 years earlier, I reckon he'd still be on the list, and I reckon he'd still be getting games. So, because he's the kind of player that he's a safe player. You know what you're going to get from him. And I think that's the kind of player that Essendon has liked in the past. They've liked safe players that you know that what you're going to get from them. And so I think it's probably a good sign that we've decided enough is enough with someone like him. Same with Ham, I think, as well. You know what you're going to get from him.
Yeah.
But we've decided that safe isn't good enough, and it can only be a good thing. It might go balls up, but at least you're having a crack.
Yeah, I think particularly with we were really tight on list spots this year. I think Aaron Brand are a bit stiff, but like I said, I think there was a bit of a list balancing that needed to happen with the amount of key defenders we had and the lack of sort of other depth we had in other areas, particularly sort of the smaller wing, half forward sort of spots. So, and particularly depth in our midfield as well, it should be noted. So I think we gave Air an opportunity to train on, and he declined it to go to St Kilda, which good for him. He probably sees an easier spot into the best 22 there. Dev Smith, just quickly, 2018 Crichton medalist. That knee just was never right, really, after he injured in 2019. I think it was Anzac Day. He injured it the following year, and he was just never the same after that. But I think his last 18 months, Essendon fans were coming for him hard, and his performance has probably deserved it. But I think it's worth acknowledging for 18 months there, he was looking like arguably one of the best pickups of the last 20 years for Essendon.
And look, he still did his role, and I think the problem was people got a little bit impatient. They just refused to accept that his knee wasn't what it was, and
Mm.
yeah, because 2018, his last game in 2019 against Sydney, 13 disposals and 10 tackles, like that's just huge numbers, and then.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, just never really hit those heights again. I mean, he had I think it was a good game against Port Adelaide late in 2020. 2021, I mean, I still didn't think he was overly horrible in 2021, but
No, no.
he copped a lot of hate in 2021. And, for a small forward, or bloke who really wasn't a small forward, because I know he played a lot of forward line pressure, but he was more of a half forward link up player. Like he was never a big goal kicker for a small forward, which might sound a little bit weird, but it is what it is. So again, I thought he was all right in 20, and then this year he just unfortunately the knee and Father Time caught up with him. But he did his best, and I prefer to look back at the fonder memories. And unfortunately, a lot of Essendon fans we do have a very strong history of turning on our own very quickly.
Yeah, I think that it was a degenerative knee. I think he was talking about it being bone on bone by the end of his career. He just didn't have the explosion to do what he did back in 2018, which was the number one pressure and tackle player in the competition 2018. And once that went out of his game because of the injury, I think he didn't have the spread and the run to be a weapon either side of the ball in defence or attack. But he's still a Crichton medalist, and we don't give those out willy-nilly. So congratulations to Dev Smith, and enjoy retirement. Speaking of retirement, there is one man that we ought to talk about. He's come back from career death. He obviously didn't die in reality, but Anthony McDonald, Tipping Woody, is back. He signed a 1-year contract with the club the day before the list management deadline on 10 November, before the draft. He's back for next year. The good vibes are here, and he looks happy, which is the really important thing from the photos at training.
It does. I'll just ask you a question, and something that just made me a little bit amused is I have read a few opposition fans complaining about the fact that we used his retirement to obviously draft in the mid-season draft, and now he's back. They seem to think it's sort of circumventing. I look at that and go, is it any different to a long-term injury? Like the guy walked away from the game. He was unable to be selected. He was unavailable.
Yeah.
Is it as cheeky as some opposition fans are trying to point out?
I don't think so.
I see that. I can see their point, but
is
it at the same time? Yeah.
Is it any more dodgy than how clubs routinely delist guys with the promise of re-rookieing them so they get an extra spot in the national draft? Like, it's the same principle, isn't it? We saw Hugh Greenwood last year get delisted by the Gold Coast so they could open up some extra list spots for the draft, and he got snatched up. Is it not the same principle? I think it's just people want to be salty. But I'm more worried. I'm more concerned about having Anthony McDonald 2.0. I think we missed him terribly. We had no small forward pressure and depth really outside of Matt Guelphy, who was doing his best but learning on the fly. We didn't replace his 35 goals and intimidating forward pressure last year. That was a huge hole in our forward line. And he might be a slow burn to get back to his best, but just having him around the group, particularly with a bunch of young Indigenous guys around the club, we'll get to Anthony Makara and the Davey twins soon. It's just great to have him back. And I think it's putting smiles on faces, which we haven't had really all this year.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much of a slow burn it's going to be to get him back to his best. I mean, I suppose... Again, similar to Dev Smith, Father Time catches up with us all, but he doesn't look that unfit to me. I mean, and I'm only a pleb sitting on the couch looking at pictures, so I have no idea. I don't have the skin fold tests and all that rubbish that they play with these days. But to me, he doesn't look like somebody that's going to. I'd be surprised if he's not available early in the season. I just look at his body shape and his body size, and I go, he's probably never been the skinniest bloke going around. He's always been, a bit of a tank.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that there was an opposition fan on our board, and look, he does seem to have some sort of knowledge, and he's been okay. I can't remember his name, but and he was talking, I won't be back before round 11. I mean,
I don't think that's the case. Yeah.
I mean, this is AFL. These blokes are he's training now pre-season. The AFL round one's what? 15 weeks, 16 weeks away or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, average Joe plebs like you and me can turn around and train for a half marathon in 12 weeks. Like, and we don't have all the bloody bells and whistles that they've got sitting at their door. So, I'd be amazed if he's not in the side very early in the piece, barring, assuming everything goes well, assuming there's no injury setbacks or to borrow a line from Shawn Michaels, and I don't know if you know who that is, Grizz, but he might lose his smile again. Other than that, I can't see why you'd expect him to be not playing AFL football very early. I just think it's a waste of time in VFL.
Yeah, okay. So to be clear, when I say be back and firing, I don't mean in the team. I mean back to 100% in form flying Anthony McDonald-Tipungwuti. I think you play him into form early in the season, but he hasn't played at AFL level. He wouldn't have kicked the ball in anger at AFL level for 19 months, 18 months by the time round one rolls over next year. So there will be an element of training can only get you so fit and can only get you so in touch and firing and adapted to the speed of the AFL game. That's more what I mean. Like it'll take I think it's going to take a month or two for him to get to absolutely 110% fit and firing. Anthony McDonald-Tipungwuti. I think he'll play before then. I would expect to see him probably about a month into the season, at least. Anything longer than that, then I'm going to start getting suspicious. But I just meant in terms of like his form output as opposed to whether or not he's going to play.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. We will just note Josh Eyre and Cody Brand. A lot of discussion on the board about how they were unlucky to get delisted. What's your thoughts on that? I think, 2 years in the system, their first year was sort of ruined sort of by COVID a little bit, or on the road for half of it with no VFL for them to develop. They both showed signs this year, but it seemed just to be a list spot casualty more than anything.
Yeah, well, I thought Cody Brown was going to get games this year, so I was a little bit surprised he got delisted. But I mean, the reality is we do have too many players down that slot, and Stewart, despite the fact that I sort of said before, unless you think he's going to win the flag next couple of years, he's still going to be good depth in the next couple of years. So you can't really afford to take all these young blokes in, especially if we end up trying to play Cox down there as well, which I think would be silly. I think we'd be better off playing him at centre forward, but it is what it is. So yeah, I mean, COVID was always hard for these guys. Josh is off at St Kilda now. He's training with St Kilda for a list spot. I reckon, by all reports, he'll probably end up getting a list spot at St Kilda, which will be interesting. To be honest, I don't really know what their key position defender stocks are like. There's a spot in their forward line if he wants it.
Yeah.
Because
big Max King's down.
Wow. So that sort of kills St Kilda because
that's going to really affect St Kilda next year. Like this isn't a St Kilda podcast, but wowzers, that's a huge loss for them.
I mean, they still have Membry down there, but name a competent St Kilda forward outside of Tim Membry, and good luck to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how that's all going to unfold for them. So I mean, I think he's every chance. I think Max King going down as brutal as it is probably increased his chances.
Yeah.
Look, I think Brand's probably the stiff. I think he'll go away, hopefully he'll go away and play VFL or Sandful or one of the state league comps and not go back to, amateur thirds or whatever it is that some AFL players tend to do after they've been dropped. Because I think he's got the talent. So I think if he went back and applied his craft at a state league, I think he'd still be on the club's radars, but I don't know what his plans are. So he's probably stiff, and as I said, I think Josh is going to end up St Kilda, so he's stiff to not be on the list, but still obviously good enough to play AFL.
We'll move to the draft now because I think this sort of flows in the same breath. We'll get to sort of Sartis at pick 5 in a minute, but we drafted Lewis Hayes at pick 25, who was a 200 centimeter key defender, which had a lot of the board trying to figure out. So we delist Aaron Brand, keep Stewart, bring in Wiedemann, but then draft another skinny 200 centimeter defender, which tells me either we didn't have much faith in Brandon Eyre, or we really like this Lewis Hayes kid who was touted as a first round pick, and we thought he's just too good to pass up. Yeah, we don't know much about these boys other than what's been discussed about starters. But what was your takeaway from the draft that occurred? I think it was probably 2 weeks ago now on the dot.
Yeah, so Lewis Hayes is the brother of Port Adelaide ruck Sam Hayes.
Yeah, I think so.
Who, from what I've seen of him, moves incredibly well for a bloke his size.
Yeah.
So if Lewis can move similar to him, then we're even better than him, which you'd sort of hope because he's not a ruckman. We've probably got a pretty good one there. I think from all reports, he's been a pretty solid intercepting, marking defender, and he's capable of sort of playing the tall or short, and he's pretty composed in with the ball in his hand. It's really he's just needs to improve his contested work and his strength, which are two big parts for a key defender. But you can always put bulk on a bloke and see how he goes. I mean, having said that, our greatest defender of the last probably 50 years, probably nearly one of our greatest, nearly of all time. You'd argue in Dustin Fletcher never really put bulk on, and he was able to wrestle with the big boys. He just used his arms and legs. So if Lewis is able to do something similar, then it'd be a great pickup. And it really just sounded like he managed to just be impossible to ignore at that pick. I mean,
sure.
he had 3 games this year in the NAB League where he had over 26 touches. So for a key defender, that's pretty bloody good, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. And I think that's it. I think it was. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. When I realized we drafted 200 centimeter redheaded key defender from the western suburbs of Melbourne, I was just sort of like, oh, sign me up. But it gave him a bit of deja vu, but all he needs to do is wear some long sleeves and I'm sold. But yeah, you're right. Dustin Fletcher needed to put on 5 kilos basically his entire career. And
another thing with Hayes is he's a good rebounder. So he averages 5 rebounds a game in the under 18s, which for a key position defender, I mean, it might sound silly, but I reckon that's pretty handy because normally the key position defender, you sort of bring the ball to ground and then letting the smaller blokes do the work at ground level. Whereas if he's able to do that himself, well, you take it and run. He won't play next year. No. He'll be a 2 or 3 year prospect, and we've got, as you sort of alluded to, we've got plenty of depth down back. So, but as somebody has said on the board, there's nothing wrong with having another potential gun because the reality is not every player makes it.
Yeah.
So we can point at that and go, look, we've got 4 or 5 blokes under the age of 25 and they're all looking really good. But the reality is that out of that 4 or 5, at least 2 of those aren't going to make it.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with having an additional player in a pretty crucial spot in the ground.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, I think this probably feeds more into what we're going to move on to now with what we did with pick 5. But I've always been a proponent. Michael Lombardi, who is a well-known general manager and respected sort of list builder of American sports, who actually came to Essendon, funnily enough, like 5 years ago. But we buried the report, which don't get me started. But he always says you draft for talent and you recruit via trade and free agency for needs. And I feel like that's what we've done here. We've gone, look, Lewis Hayes was just the most talented guy on the board. Who knows in 4 year time when he's ready to be a best 22 player, what our list is going to look like. We've just got to take him. But we'll move to pick 5 now because that seemed to be the sticking point of the draft for many. I think everyone was talking about how the first 4 picks, including Will Ashcroft, was sort of set in stone. It was Essendon that was going to set the draft going in whatever direction it was going to go to. The choice seemed to come down to 2 guys. There was Elijah Sartis, who was EDPS, who's a well-known draft expert on our board. He's loved Elijah Sartis for the best part of 4 years. He's guys routinely considered one of the best 2 or 3 prospects in a draft that sort of slid because of an injury and other guys going past him whilst he was injured. Or this guy called Mateus Philippou, who had a really good year for in the Sandful and for SA in the under-18 champs, and a large proportion of the board seemed to think he would be the big-bodied mid that we desperately needed. We ended up going Elijah Sartis. Talk me through your thought process with this selection. What you wanted to happen, how you feel about the pick being Elijah Sartis.
Yeah, so I mean, Philippou is obviously was considered the big body that I think a lot of us desperate for us to have. The big knock on him, from what I understand, is his kicking.
Yep.
And I think we have enough poor midfield kickers, to be honest. Other than Zach Merritt, our midfield, I don't think is great by foot. I know Elijah Sardis is. There's also talk that he's not great with his foot skills, but he sounds like he's better than Philippou. So on that metric, purely that metric alone, I'd be looking at Sardis because he's not as big as Philippou. I mean, Philippou's got about 4 or 5 centimeters and a couple of kilos on him, but again, they're only 18 years old, so he's not. So Sardis hasn't finished growing. So, I mean, Philippou's still probably always going to have those couple of centimeters on him. Doesn't mean Sardis, just because Philippou's bigger, doesn't mean Sardis is small. So, I still think Sardis will be able to go in the middle. He seems like he's a lot more consistent than Philippou as well, from what I understand. I think Philippou is sort of been a little bit of a late charge. It would probably might be a fair assumption.
I think so, yeah. I think with Philippou and Sardis, it was the tale of, whilst everyone wanted Philippou to be the big-bodied midfielder, a lot of the draft experts on sort of BigFooty were saying he's not really a big-bodied mid in the sense of a Bont or an Ollie Wines or a Nat Fife. He was, a marking high half forward that could rotate through the midfield. And as talented as he might be, we already have too many guys that fit that description. I think Jake Stringer could fit that description. Kyle Langford absolutely fits that description. Nick Martin, Archie Perkins could fill that role as well. Whereas Elijah Sardis was a pure mid. He was the guy that accumulates a huge amount of ball all throughout his junior football. He's a guy that is only a month older than Philippou. So what you were saying about the development, everyone's saying, oh, Philippou, youngest guy in the draft class. Elijah Sardis was, I think, like 6 weeks older than him. So there's still a lot of development in Sardis left. And you look at that, the size of his hands, his shoulders, and his hips, he's going to fill out to be an explosive beast. And when I know he probably doesn't, at the moment, he's probably not the answer to what our midfield deficits are. But we can't keep looking so short-sighted. And I think our premiership window at earliest is 2025, 2026. Who knows what our midfield's going to look. There is a realistic world, Bonce, where in 12 months' time, Darcy Parish is a restricted free agent, and Dylan Shield has got 1 year left on his deal and is north of 30. They could both be gone off our list, in which case Sardis slots straight in. And so, what does our midfield look in 2026 when, Sardis has 80 games under his belt and has filled out more? That's more what I'm worried about. And I just think he was the better bet as a midfielder than Philippou was.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Draft Central they said that Sardis is the best player at spreading from a stoppage. That no player in the draft spreads better than Sardis, and he gets the ball. He uses his pace, and he's nearly impossible to stop when he pounces on the ball. So, I mean, he might not be that big bullocking player like Philippou is that just runs over blokes, but it sounds like he's not that far behind him. So yeah, it's you just take it, and I mean, he averaged 33 touches. It was just behind Ashcroft, who obviously went pick 2 and I think should have gone pick 1, but anyway, that's just GWS just decided to not bid. So
yeah, and then got absolutely stuffed over by Sydney in what was one of the great draft moves.
Yeah, so just silly. I mean, Sardis, a big concern. It's been raised by a prominent poster multiple times, and to be honest, I sort of got sick of reading it because I was just over it. But is his defensive pressure? But it's not like he doesn't defend at all. He does defend. He just hasn't. I mean, the reality is at under 18 level, when you're an attacking midfielder who is getting the ball 34 times a game, you're not defending that much because you're the one that's driving the possession. I mean, under 18 football is good football, but it's very different to the AFL level in that the top blokes, I think, who go out and get the bulk touches just don't tackle as much because they're getting their hands on the ball. So we'll see, but I'm not at all worried about his defensive pressure. I think Brad Scott's a very good defensive coach. I mean, I know people said that about Truck, but Brad Scott actually has the runs on the board at senior level, has been able to do it. So, we'll wait and see. But I wouldn't be too stressed about Sardis's defensive efforts if I'm being perfectly honest. Yeah, it's just it's one of those things that we'll wait and see what happens, and hopefully he comes good.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about we need to be unless you're drafting Joel Selwood or you're drafting Brett Kirk reincarnate, 18-year-old isn't going to come in and fix your defensive issues through your midfield. That
No,
has to be changed through your senior players. And so, like I said, we could be drafting Brett Kirk reincarnate or Cameron Ling reincarnate. It wouldn't matter if Merritt, Shield, Parrish, Caldwell don't buy in as okay, we've got to defend. And if they do that, then no matter who we draft, we'll buy into that as well. So that was more my issue. I like if all things were even and that was the difference, sure, but that wasn't the case. And so, drafting is all prognosticating. It's all guessing what they could be. I think Sartis and Philippou probably had similar ceilings, but Sardis for me was a much surer bet to fit it. Whereas I'm not sure what Philippou will be at AFL level. I can see what Sardis will be at AFL level. We'll probably move on to the rest of the draft now. We've already sort of chatted about Lewis Hayes and sort of how he fits in with the conglomerate of tools we seem to have or did have at the back end. And we'll talk with a couple of lads who have been foretold seemingly for, I reckon, a decade by this point, Bonts. With pick 45, I think with pick 54, 9 picks apart, we acquired Alan Davey Jr. and Jaden Davey, both from the Oakley Chargers, obviously from Northern Territory, but we know them obviously as the sons of Alan Froggy Davey. Alan's bid came a bit later than you would have thought. A lot of people were thinking top 25 for him. He slid all the way out to 45, which was great for us. It's finally happened. 10 years in the making, Bonds.
It has finally happened. All right, he did slide a little bit, but I also think that probably just comes down to the fact that clubs knew, it didn't matter where they took him. Once we got to use our second pick, what was the point in bidding on him, really? Like, well, what were they going to do? Because then obviously we used the later pick on Jaden, so they sort of knew what we were aiming for in this draft. So while it was a little bit later, I think it just came down to the fact that the clubs just looked at it and went, well, they're going to take the 2 picks early, then they're going to take the Davey boys, and then obviously they're going to take young Mankara later on. So it's very exciting. They have been foretold as the saviours of Essendon since they were 6 years old, it feels like. So I hope the pressure doesn't get to him too much. I don't know how much we'll see of him next year. I mean, I think Jaden's still recovering from his ACL, which he did do pretty early in the year, so he might be back playing football come round 1. But I would say if we're going to see either of them, it would be Elwyn Jr. that I think we would see first. But I'm very excited and very keen to see how they run. And it's interesting. You got a twin coaching twins, so that'll be a little bit of fun.
Yeah, I think I think with Jaden, I think he's mostly recovered. I think Dodoro sort of let it slip in an interview that he's actually further ahead than they thought he would be in his recovery at this point. And there's a sticking point there in that I think they want to chuck him on the LTI or the long-term injury list to open up a supplemental selection period spot or a preseason rookie spot. So if we do put him on that rookie list or that long-term injury list, he won't be playing at least till basically the mid-season draft. But I think it's firstly great to get father-sons on board. It's great for the nostalgia. I think it's great that we've now got our future full forward and centre-half forward locked away. As we all know, Froggy Davey was one of the great Essendon centre-half forwards, or at least that's how we played him. But I agree with you. I doubt we see too much of them next year. I think they're probably both slider builds and they might get a game here or there, but I doubt we'll see much of them. I think it's interesting that Allen probably. I don't know if there's a redundancy with his position, but it seems like he would play a very similar position to, although in a very different way, to maybe a Nick Martin as sort of that wing half forward as opposed to a genuine small forward like Jaden. But they're obviously both really talented boys. And the stories of Alan Davey dropping them off into Dodoro's office during training for Dodoro to babysit him, I don't know how real it is, but it's a nice sentiment nonetheless.
Yeah, so Alwyn does play a lot like Aaron Davey, so his uncle from Melbourne,
Yeah,
who
right.
obviously did get up the ground a little bit more than Alwyn Senior, who was the this permanent stay at home forward, which is obviously what Jaden sort of does. And Alwyn's, I think Alwyn's slightly taller, but not by much, obviously. So it'll be interesting because yeah, I mean, the pick we got him at does not really fit where Alwyn was going to go, and same with Jaden because before he did his ACL, there was talk that he could be even better than his brother. So I think we've got at least two very good prospects there. Whether or not they come on, we'll wait and see. But it is always nice to get father sons into the club, and it's always nice to get exciting father sons into the club. And I don't think we've had an exciting father son like this since we took Danaher. And regardless of what you think, he did give us a fair old ride while he was with us. So yeah, hopefully we're looking to get the similar sort of ride with these two boys, but hopefully with a better ending than we had with Joe.
Yes, yeah. Look, it's still weird to see Joe in a Brisbane jumper for mine, but this is the Essendon podcast, not the Brisbane podcast. The other thing about the David boys, obviously, Indigenous lads have, I think, had issues retaining or recruiting Indigenous guys in the past sort of 5 years or so, really, outside of Anthony McDowell and Tippingwoody. But another Indigenous guy we picked up was another guy that's been foretold basically for the last 12 months. He appeared on the radar of Essendon fans because I think ADPS posted some highlights of him kicking 7 goals for his private school in Adelaide last year as a 17-year-old. We're going to pick him up. He went undrafted through the national draft. And for those listening who don't know how that works, because he's in our academy, we basically pick him up as a Category B rookie, which means he sort of doesn't count as a list spot or against the salary cap completely. Certainly not the entirety of his salary. So we'll have access to him. He won't be able to play unless there's a long-term injury, but seems to be as raw gets, but an exciting talent nonetheless.
So is it because he's Category B he can't play unless there's a long term injury? That because the rookie list obviously doesn't have that. The Category A doesn't have that anymore.
Yeah.
I thought we had this discussion last time with Tom Hurd, and I distinctly remember that he was actually that Category Bs now no longer require. I feel like we could have played Tom Hurd who was Category B. So I don't think that long term injury list rule exists anymore for any kind of rookie. I think you can just put them on if you want.
I think there's a certain part of the year where you can just play them. I think there's a certain time of the year. I think it used to be the same with rookies. After a certain point in the year, you could play your rookies regardless of your long-term injury list. I feel like I would have to do the research on that, but I think the fact he's a Category B rookie means we can't necessarily play with that long. But we'll hash that out over the course of the summer, regardless of how we recruited him. We've picked him up. He's a very raw prospect, but one with a lot of talent nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. So he did slide because there hasn't been much exposure, I suppose, to him. Clubs were, and the other thing was he came out pretty early and said that he wanted to be an Essendon player, and I think that probably scared off a few clubs because on raw talent alone, he's definitely worth a shot. But because I think we could match after pick 40, and we obviously were going to again. I think clubs didn't try and play silly buggers with us. I think they just went, he's going to Essendon anyway, so we'll just let him go through because there's no point picking somebody only to have a club match it immediately when there's no real benefit to it. Because I think at the stage where we would have had to have matched for him, we would have lost pick 65 or whatever it was, and really clubs aren't that dumb. So that's part of the reason why he slid all the way through the draft. One of his main strengths is obviously his X factor, and I'll be honest, I don't think we've had an X factor player at Essendon for a very long time, really. I mean, float back to Joey Danaher or Razio Fantasia. Those blokes had a bit of X factor. Anthony McDonald, Tipper Woody has also had a bit of X factor, but not. I don't think we've had a young X factor player or a player that's just got so much potential. Because I mean, Tipper was a maturer aged player when he came to us. So we haven't really had the Keziah Pickett style, and I think that Mankara could possibly be that X factor style player for us. If not next year, then maybe the year after.
Yeah, it's a weird one because there was sort of conflicting reports about his height and his position. He was 1.185, then he was 192, then 188. I think he's a genuine mid-sized 186 centimeter sort of high leaping, really skilled X factor type forward. And I don't know what his pressure's like, but someone that I know in SA explained it like he's a really powerful Luke Bruce, which I thought that's a pretty big rap. Like that's like I don't think that's probably a fair expectation on him, but more that sort of genuine medium size, but like you said, genuine X factor, can sit on your head or crumb from the pocket. I think you're right. We won't see him next year. I doubt we'll probably see him in the first 18 months of playing, of being on an AFL list. So I think his tank, he didn't finish the 2K time trial, I think, at the AFL Combine, which had a lot of clubs scared off. He had to sort of get helped off after tearing a hamstring. Yeah, he didn't play a lot of football this year, which is probably another reason he didn't sort of get picked up. There was not a lot of exposed form. I think he had an absolute blinder against Collingwood in the VFL. And then again, as you know, against Collingwood's VFL list as part of the Australian Academy, and then just sort of disappeared for about 3.5 months, which never does his draft prospects any good, I think. But I'm really excited to have him again. More Indigenous talent. It seems like Tip is really keen to have him on board and to take on a mentorship role, and I think that's one of the reasons Tip has come back is that sort of exciting Indigenous mentorship role. And it's one part I'm really looking forward to next year is we used to be the benchmark for not just Indigenous talent, but pathways and social activism in the Indigenous space. Look, I'm glad that at least in some part with, even Dean Rioli getting elected to the board with the and his connection to the Tiwi, that we're really starting to focus on things that made us great as a club. And I think that sort of linked to the Indigenous community is one of them.
Yeah, and I just want to make 100% clear, the reason he didn't finish the 2K time trial is because he went off injured, not because he can't run 2Ks.
Yeah, I said that. I think he tore a hamstring.
Just making sure that our listeners are 100% clear that he tore the hamstring and therefore wasn't able to unfortunately finish the time trial. But it will be an exciting time. It was interesting that you mentioned Dean Rioli because it's sort of a lovely segue, I think, into the appointment of Craig Vozzo. I just thought would be something we could have a quick chat about before we sort of head back towards the couple of the later moves in the draft that we made. Where do you see Craig in? Do you think that he's going to be what we need? I think it's a very safe appointment. I think we've stolen one from the Eagles because I think that they thought he was going to be their CEO in waiting, and I think maybe he's just got sick of waiting. So I mean, I think it's quite a solid appointment, and I think it's something that we probably should have just done in the first place.
Yeah, I was about to say he's probably safer than Andrew Thorburn, but the way that has played out in the last few months, any sort of selection would have been safer than Andrew Thorburn, it seems. Yeah, I must admit that when it comes to CEO candidates, I don't profess to know more than I do. The fact that he was at a club like the West Coast Eagles, and the West Coast Eagles have had a down year, no doubt about it, but they are still an absolute powerhouse of an organisation. Their corporate structure and their corporate power is almost unrivaled in the AFL. I think really it's Collingwood, Richmond and West Coast at this point. And from what I can tell, West Coast were really gutted to lose him, which probably tells you what you need to know. A guy that's got experience in the football industry, unlike the last couple of CEOs we've had, or when I said last couple of CEOs, I mean, Xavier Campbell, who was chief financial officer for a while before coming on board. I really don't know much about CEO, so I won't profess to know more than I do, other than to say he seems like a good appointment. He's a football guy, worked in the football industry, which I think was really important, and particularly with the newish board. I think the proof will be in the pudding, and I will judge him really by how much of the changes floated in our external review are implemented, which is really his power. The buck stops with him in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, as you sort of mentioned, coming from a club like West Coast, who have been very professionally run despite their issues in the mid-2000s, I think it can only be a positive, and I look forward to seeing what he can do with us.
Yeah. And I suppose the other benefit is he's not an Essendon person, which over the last 10 years is a nice change and probably needed considering all that happened really in August, September. We will just really quickly go to the rest of sort of the recruitment news. We had one pick in the rookie draft and we picked a young man from the Western Districts Football Club in South Australia to pick up Rhett Montgomery. Now,
Sorry, that Central Districts, not
Central
Western Districts, mate.
Sorry, Central Districts. Oh, okay. I've got to admit my Sandful team knowledge is not up to scratch, but we picked up Rhett Montgomery. When I heard it, I thought he was some 18th century British explorer, but he's he's a real person. I thought for a second, did we just redraft Garrett McDonough? Like, did we just pick the same guy, stick a mustache on him, and change his name just to see if we could float one by the AFL? But no, he's a real person, sort of a utility backman, plays tall, small. Gave me some Marty Gleason vibes. And when I say Marty Gleason, some Essendon fans will take that as an insult. I certainly don't mean that as an insult. Before he basically dismembered his ankle with that preseason game in Colac, Marty Gleason was a pretty good player, but I suppose he's probably more depth than anything, and we'll see how he goes. What's your thoughts on it?
It's a little bit like the last sort of mature age defender that we took from the Central Districts Football Club, which was a bloke by the name of Paul Thomas. I'm not sure if you remember Paul Thomas playing for Essendon. He was a Sheedy special. Could play, definitely could play, but just came to the league a little bit too late, I think. Yeah, it'll be good. I think Rhett's probably going to struggle to get a game early. He has been, from all reports, a pretty reliable figure in the Central District's defence this year. And I can't believe you didn't remember the Central District's name. They played 12 grand finals in a row at one stage in the Sandful. They won 9 premierships in 12 years. They were the powerhouse of the early 2000s in the Sandful Grizz. I can't believe I'm having to tell you this because I still remember that. And I don't really follow the Sandful at all. But anyway,
right.
He's got. Yeah, well, for a bit of background knowledge, just because you didn't ask, Grizz, they actually went back to back, missed a flag, won 3 in a row, missed a flag, won 4 in a row. It was an impressive time to be a Central District.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, they didn't muck around. They didn't muck around in that decade, the Central Districts. Anyway, he has an 80% efficiency by foot, which is pretty bloody handy, especially if you can get that going to AFL level coming out of the back line. It does feel a little bit like we've just gone and tried to find ourselves a Jordan Ridley backup in case Jordan Ridley goes down, touch wood. But yeah, I'm not sure where he fits or how he fits at this stage. But at 190 centimetres, 83 kilos, if he can build the tank up, maybe he goes into the middle a little bit. Maybe, it's hard to tell these days with these blokes because gone are the days where the forwards and the key position defenders are the 190 to 195, and then the ruckmen are 196 to 204, and everything below that's just a midfielder. Now anyone can be anything. So I think long term, I reckon he's going to probably not fit into the back line, so therefore they'd be looking at a different spot for him. Where that is, I'm not sure. But as you said, he just provides good depth, and he was good depth at Sandful level, so I assume that would translate across to good depth at VFL level.
Yeah, look, I think when you're picking the rookie draft and you're picking mature age guys, I suppose you're looking for guys that can step in straight away. I think there's a bit of redundancy with Jake Kelly and Jordan Ridley and maybe even Jaden Laverty to a certain extent, depending on the players they play on. I honestly think he's probably more just depth than anything if we have a couple of injuries. We're the second youngest team in the competition, so I don't think picking up another 18-year-old was going to help us. If we had a couple of injuries, we probably needed a guy that could step in and play a role pretty quickly without much development. And I think that's just him. And the benefit of the rookie list is, it's a 1-year deal. If he doesn't work out, then we've got the list spot for next year, which was sort of the secret of Garrett McDonough being 26 when we drafted him. We had to sign him for 1 year, and I think this is a similar scenario. So that's all of our draft picks, unless you want to add anything else on Rhett Montgomery. We have a couple of guys training on over the summer in anticipation, as we said, of Jaden Davey going on the long-term injury list if and when he does. First is Ruben Maguire, I think I'm saying his name right, from WA. He's a ruckman, a second forward ruck, good leaping ability, a bit of Jared Brennan in the highlights and how he sort of scoops the ball up one-handed. And then more importantly, I think probably more interestingly, is Will Zibkowski, who a lot of people would have been really happy if he had been drafted with our second pick in the draft at pick 25. He went completely undrafted, even through the rookie draft. And he's actually agreed to train on in January with us in anticipation of a possible SSP spot. So, yeah, and I think Tom Phillips is the other one that's training with us with a chance for that rookie spot. So, what are your thoughts on those three guys? Maguire, Sibkowski, and Tom Phillips. And we saw Nick Martin come from absolutely nowhere last year and find a role. Do you reckon we're a chance of? I reckon Zibkowski might be a great shout, but what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not too sure on Maguire. He seems to be a bloke that was okay at sort of that under 16s level, stepped up to under 18s, and sort of really struggled. Didn't really take that next step. But his height and everything, I think, is a big factor. But if you read his draft profile, he managed 6 goals in 14 games, which you go, well, if he's playing ruck, that's okay. But then you look at the ruck stats, he only averaged 10 hit outs a game, and that's also not great. So, it's sort of where does he play? And it feels like he hasn't really found that spot. And I'm also, to be honest, I know that Andrew Phillips is not getting any younger, but we do have Nick Bryan and Sam Draper on the list. So do we need another young ruckman? Yeah, I'm not sure. Do we need another raw rookie ruckman? I'd be pretty adamant we don't. I don't see Maguire getting on our list. I think we've probably got him over, training him up and saying, look, go back, show us that you've improved, and we'll come on. We'll come back to you later in the piece. So you call him Sisbowski?
So I understand it to be Zibkowski.
Zibkowski. Well, Zibkowski, I reckon, is probably going to be the one that I would be interested in terms of, I think he'd be the next Nick Martin style. He placed top 10 in the vertical jump at the draft combine, which was, an impressive feat. He averaged 23 touches across the NAB League this year, and he's a big frame. So there are a lot of people who thought we were going to take him with our second pick, or a lot of people who were hoping we'd take him with our second pick, and then he just never got taken. And there's a million reasons why that happens every single year. No matter what year it is, there's always a bunch of draft names that draft watchers who aren't part of the club scene fall in love with and are just absolutely gobsmacked that these blokes aren't picked up. And then 9 times out of 10, we never hear from them again, unless you become, a Nick Martin or a Michael Barlow or a mature age genius like Tim Kelly. So yeah, there's got to be a reason why he slipped. I don't know what that reason is, but in terms of list profile, I think he's probably the one that we take. Tom Phillips feels a little bit like if we're going to take Tom Phillips, may as well have just kept Tom Cutler on the list. They're different players, but it seems to me that, just by regurgitating a player that's already been proven that they can't really crack it at AFL level at a consistent basis, we may as well have just kept the one we've got rather than bringing a new one.
Yeah, that's my view on Tom Phillips. I think he's signed on for the Essendon VFL. I think he'll be great value there. I think if I'm Essendon, I'm saying, well, Tom, if you want to be on a senior list, show us, half a season of absolutely tearing the VFL apart, and we might pick you up in the mid-season draft if we need you. But we're pretty set on the wings. That's sort of one position we have plenty of guys that we can run through there. The thing with Zibkowski that I'm really interested in is he seems like the meat and potatoes mid that we never draft but always need 2 or 3 of. Like every year we're looking at guys like Jack Bartel or Jack Graham. Everyone was sort of really interested in getting Jack Graham. But you even look at guys like Tom Atkins at Geelong, these sorts of mids that do all the dirty stuff, do all the hard stuff, tackle, bind defensively, and just do all the stuff around the edges to allow your more offensively gifted midfielders to thrive. And we never draft those guys, and it drives me nuts. But I feel like Will might be potentially that sort of player. I think that the knock on him is, what does he do with the ball in hand? Is he a damaging play ball in hand? And probably more importantly is his running power. That it seemed like all the knocks on him from guys at Rookie Me Central and in the greater media was, can this guy get to a point where he can run and not be a liability in defense? Like, unless you're Joe Watson, Sam Mitchell, Josh Kennedy from the Swans level savant footballer, where your ability to read the play is so elite that you just know exactly where you need to be at any given time. Unless you're that level of savant from a footballing perspective, you need to be able to just not be, you don't need to be Brad Hill in terms of running power, but you need to be good enough runner at AFL level to just not get torn apart on the spread, which we were routinely last year, or just not get burnt from a stoppage. And I think provided he can get his running power to that, he's willing to tackle, he's willing to do the dirty stuff, his work rate, win clearances, feed the ball out to guys like Merritt and Shield, I think would be a perfect complement to the midfield we've already got.
Yeah, the description on his kicking is it's a penetrating kick, which to me means it's not overly accurate, but he's able to thump it long when he has to.
Yeah, that's probably the nice way of saying exactly that, isn't it? And that's fine. There are we've got guys like Zach Merritt and apparently Elijah Sartis is a good kick in that situation. Dylan Shield when he's got a bit of time. Like we've got enough. Nick Martin's a great kicker of the footy. We've got enough offensively minded mids. All we need is a defensive guy, a meat potatoes guy that can sweep the stoppage defensively, can lay tackles and do all the hard stuff that Jack Graham and Tom Atkins and those sorts of guys do for the really good teams. And who knows, maybe you can do that. Any more thoughts on players, or do you want to move on to the fixture, Bonds?
No, we're going to have a quick chat about the fixture, I think. To round things off nicely.
Yeah, so the fixture obviously came out last week. Essendon's double-ups were confirmed. They are, for the record, Collingwood, Geelong, GWS, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide, and West Coast. Fox Footy have us as the easiest draw in the competition based on double-ups. Not a commercially great fixture in terms of primetime games, but in terms of ladder position and the ease of the schedule, we haven't come out half bad here.
No, it's not a great fixture commercially, but I mean, what do people expect? Let's be honest. We have struggled this year. We are getting the time slots I think we deserve, and as a result, if you actually look at it, we get maybe one. I think we get one home game on a Saturday night. Everything else seems to be on that Sunday or in a dicky time spot. And that one home game is obviously dream time at the G against the Tigers, because there are other Saturday night games, against Brisbane, against West Coast, and against St Kilda, we're actually the away team. So, yeah, commercially, it's not a great draw, but it's sort of the draw I think we deserve as a club. In terms of being easy, I think that's probably, it's a tough one, because you look at the Geelong double up and you go, that's not going to be easy at all. It depends on whether or not you rate Collingwood. I think they drop a bit, and I mean we should have beaten them at least once last year, so that'll be interesting. I don't think it's as easy on paper as it's being portrayed, but I can't see why I think that. Maybe it's just because I have no faith in the club.
But I think that when you look at, I expect, so Port Adelaide, for example, is one of our double ups. I expect them to be markedly better this year. I think they could push up into that top 7 or 6 teams. I think West Coast, probably aren't going to make the finals, but they're not going to be as bad as they were this year. They had a horrific run with injuries. They've picked up a lot of mids to the draft, which was one of their weak points. And then Geelong, Collingwood are obviously, top 4 teams last year. So I think, just it's easy to say in December, this is the easiest draw. I think, teams like Sydney and Melbourne have absolutely copped it. Like they've been given absolute shockers. But, that's what happens when you finish top of the ladder, I suppose. But really, the reality is you never know how hard a draw is going to be until the games are played. Sydney jumping up as high as they did, Port Adelaide falling out. If you got Port Adelaide twice last year, you would have thought, oh no, top 2 team. They didn't make the finals. So you never really know until the games are played and how teams rock up out of pre-season. If you got St Kilda twice, you probably would have been worried, and then Max King gets injured. Now you're not so worried. So I think we'll see how it plays out. But once we get through pre-season, I think we'll have a better idea of where that sort of sits. Yeah,
the other interesting thing that I took out of the draw was we've actually got the King's Birthday Eve game now against Carlton.
Right,
and there's talk that may become a permanent fixture in the draw, similar to how now there's the Anzac Day Eve game between Melbourne and Richmond. That they've been looking for another big game to put Essendon and Carlton into, and the King's Birthday Eve game may become that new big game.
So that would be a Sunday night.
It is a Sunday night, but obviously because it's King's birthday, formerly Queen's birthday, the next day it's the public holiday, so people will be less inclined to stay away because of the late night fixture. I mean, I personally probably still wouldn't go down on a Sunday night, but I'm not a big fan of attending night games in the first place because I have to travel 2 hours to get there. So unless I'm staying down overnight, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we've been given another attempted marquee game. To be honest, I'm a little bit sick of it. It's nice to be a big club and it's nice to be in these marquee slots, but at the same time, I just feel like at some point our draw is just going to be predictable year to year because they just keep throwing us into these slots. And thank God they took us out of Good Friday because bloody hell, I could not handle having to carry that one with North every single year.
Yeah. Wow. So Carlton got that one and they're very happy about it. They're altruistically, yeah, it's a great cause. Meanwhile, I think the news this year about the massive amount of money they pulled out of the pokies. It's altruistic in one sense, I suppose, for Good Friday. I think Essendon needs to start earning these privatised slots, to be honest. Like we've got the country game, Dreamtime of the G, Anzac Day, all that stuff is great. But, if we just keep on getting absolutely pantsed in these marquee games, what's the point of having them, really? They're not really marquee.
No, and I think that's the problem we've seen with the rest of the fixtures because we're getting these so-called marquee matchups. We get nothing anywhere else because we're rubbish.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, marquee games are great, but I'd probably rather have a Thursday night sporadically here or there than having the Sunday night King's Birthday Eve fixture. But all I want, Grizz, is for us to turn up in the first half and not put in an effort like we did against Geelong this year because I was over football at halftime against Geelong this year.
Yeah, well, we picked up Hawthorn, I think, in week one, which was...
Well, they've got a premiership winning list according to their coach. They're just missing a few bits and pieces.
I feel like that quote, like I'm... Far be it from me to be the person to defend Sam Mitchell. There are a few people in the AFL I detest more than Sam Mitchell, but I think what he said and what he meant is like how it was received and what he meant were probably two very different things. But it's very funny when sound bites like that are taken out of context.
It's like the old Mick Malthouse. I can't see a game we lose. Everyone still laughs about that, but the reality is, as the coach of the side, he has to say that. He can't look at the fixture. He can't say, "Oh, well, I look at the fixture and think we're going to lose here, and here." He has to say he thinks they can't lose. So
and Sam Mitchell can't say, "Oh, yeah, look, I'm looking at my list. By the time we're in a premiership, half of these plebs aren't going to be here."
Unfortunately for Sam, I think though the Hawthorn fans have brought into that hubris a little bit, and they're in for. I reckon they're in for a very painful time because O'Meara and Mitchell were a lot better for them than I think they care to admit.
Yeah, I think what Mitchell meant was like, and this isn't a Hawthorn podcast, so I won't labour this point very much, but I think his point was like, they've hit the draft pretty hard the last few years. The majority of, if they're going to be successful, they've probably picked up a lot of really young, talented kids. It'll be about they're not going to be good straight away, but it's probably going to take them 4 or 5 years to develop, but the guys that are going to develop into the next premiership team are probably already on their list. I don't think that's correct. I still think they've got at least 2 more drafts worth of drafting to do. I think I think we have 2 drafts worth of drafting to do just yet. But going from bottom 4 to top 4 to premiership contention is so difficult. And to just go, oh yeah, I think we've got all the pieces. It was a weird thing to say, I think. But that's probably enough about Hawthorn for what's an Essendon podcast. Bonds, thanks for jumping back on and for chatting about what was a crazy year for the Essendon Football Club. Finished with a bunch of list management. It's been a weird 3 months since the end of the year, but it's good to finally have that all wrapped up.
Yeah, well, I think we say every year as Essendon fans that next year can only get better, but surely next year can only get better.
We've been to some dark places and said those things, but that's all right. Well,
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's probably does us for this podcast. We might have we're probably going to have a few things happening over summer. To all the listeners, thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about it. And thanks for listening once again.